There are times when I think we view nostalgia as a distinctly modern phenomena, like it was something that Stranger Things invented in 2016, or that somehow people excited about a new Ghostbusters movie are aberrant and weird. How dare you look back at an earlier decade with a wistfulness and a sense of loss, 80s kids? The truth of the matter is that millennials didn't create nostalgia. It's been with us for the past 100 or so years. So, just like The Goldbergs is nostalgic for the 80s, a decade earlier that 70s show was nostalgic for the 70s, and a decade before that The Wonder Years was nostalgic for the 60s, and a decade before that Happy Days was nostalgic for the 50s, and the number of TV shows and films that were nostalgic for the glory days of the 1940s and World War II is just incalculable. No matter how crappy the decade, whether it was the scene of political turmoil, social upheaval, rampant discrimination, or a global war, there comes a point where we come to look back at it as a simpler and happier era. Believe it or not, there will one day be television shows and movies waxing nostalgic about these simple, blissful days of 2022. I'm not kidding. But what happens when a piece of nostalgia-infused media becomes a source of nostalgia all on its own, completely distinct from the era that it's about? When a musical about life in the 1950s becomes twisted and retold and eventually transforms into something utterly unrecognizable? Well, we're talking about Grease, so let's get to it. 1. What is Grease? If you're completely unfamiliar, Grease is a musical that tells the story of a bunch of high schoolers in the late 1950s getting together, breaking up, getting together again, breaking up some more, and at one point there's a dance contest and a car race, but we'll talk about the movie version of Grease in a second. Let's stick to the original play for now. At its center is a love story between greaser Danny and the new girl in school, Sandy. Danny feels compelled to act tougher and more sexually experienced than he is in order to impress his friends.
Hey, well, I spent a lot of time hanging around down at the beach. Hey, you guys don't want to hear all the horny details?
And Sandy feels pressured to retain her chaste reputation.
We went strolling, drank lemonade.
This causes conflict between the two, as the rest of the friends also struggle with their own problems. The more sexually liberated character Rizzo bristles at the society around her that tells her sex is bad, has a pregnancy scare, but in the end doesn't disavow her lifestyle. Frenchie drops out of high school to go to beauty school, but flunks out of that and ends up working at the makeup counter of Woolworths, and Kanicki gets a cool car. So, that's his plot. The first production of Grease was performed in 1971 in a theater in Chicago. And just think about that for a moment. This was a 1971 production of a play that took place in 1959, 12 years earlier. That's like if you wrote a period musical that took place in the year that Iron Man 2 came out, the year that Steve Carell left The Office. The first audiences that saw Grease remember the period that was being depicted quite well. It wasn't some bygone era, it was the very, very recent past. In fact, a few of the people who saw that initial production had actually gone to the same Chicago high school that the musical's writers had attended and knew the real Pink Ladies because, yeah, there really were Pink Ladies. In fact, a lot of the details from that original musical were actually very specific and well-observed real pieces of American high school life from that era. Details about that original Chicago production are kind of hard to find, but I've read the script from the off-Broadway version, and it's pretty wild how much it feels like something that was written by folks who were only 12 years away from the period they were writing about. There are near-constant references to pop culture of the era. Songs, magazines, TV shows, movies. Even fads like the hand jive and mooning are there, and they're not just referenced in passing. The pop culture of the era is a key component of the original stage show. These teenagers are trying to find their place in the world, and a huge part of that is negotiating the societal expectations that are being foisted upon them by the ubiquity of modern media. The way that Danny and Sandy are acting isn't just happening for no reason, it's because they're trying to live up to the masculine and feminine role models that the media has placed in front of them. Danny is trying to be a tough, sexually active, mature man, even though he's still just a kid, and Sandy is trying to be, well, one of the musical's best songs is Look at Me, I'm Sandra Dee. In the movie, the character of Rizzo sings it to a bunch of other girls at a sleepover party, but in the play, she's singing it to Danny. She's not using it to mock Sandy or to put anyone down. She's singing this song to a boy to make fun of the hypocritical and contradictory expectations that movie stars like Sandra Dee and Doris Day have placed on the teenage girls of the era, where they're expected to be both chaste and pure while also being sexually desirable for men, and how it is, all of it, an act. Incidentally, Rizzo is just the best. More than anyone else in the play, she seems to recognize that all of this is kind of dumb. And while pretty much every other character is trying to fit into their prescribed 1950s roles, she's bucking them. And even after a cheap drugstore condom breaks and she believes that she's become pregnant, Rizzo sings a defiant song called There Are Worse Things I Could Do, where she says that at least she doesn't do stuff like press against boys when we dance, make them think they stand a chance, then refuse to see it through. Also on Rizzo's list of things that are worse than her lifestyle, wait around for Mr. Right, take cold showers every night, and throw my life away on a dream that won't come true. That last part, I think, is key to understanding the original intentions of Grease, because the play version of Grease, at least as it was written in the 1970s, does not believe in these kids and in their relationships. Danny and Sandy are not one another's true love. They're just kids. Dumb, really horny teenagers. Never once are you as an audience member supposed to think of Danny and Sandy's relationship as being eternal or lasting. They're just immature teens going on dates and trying to do what the movies and magazines and love songs are telling them that they should be doing, which leads us to the irony of Grease. The musical version of Grease begins with a framing device that's absolutely crucial to understanding why it works so well and why it had so much success with its intended audience. The first scene is set in the then present day of 1971 as Rydell High is holding a reunion for the class of 1959. And while yearbook editor Patty and valedictorian Eugene are there, absent from the proceedings are our main characters. If you haven't heard it, the opening song for the musical is called Alma Mater, and it begins with a saccharine, stately, official school song about the importance of fondly remembering your dear high school. It then transforms into a rollicking rock and roll parody of a school song, with lyrics mocking the school and referencing dead skunks, underwear, toilets, and venereal disease. And this establishes a dichotomy. There is the sanitized, authorized version of history, the one promoted by the Pattys and Eugenes of the world, the one that's inscribed in the pages of yearbooks, And then there's the real history, the one where the teenagers are swearing and drinking and smoking and having sex and making mistakes and behaving like teenagers. This is also a history where the female characters are being constantly sexualized by the adults around them, from the teacher Old Man Drucker hitting on them, to radio DJ Vince Fontaine attempting to drug teenage Marty, to Sandy being kicked out of her old Catholic school because her shoes were too shiny and the Mother Superior thought that the boys could see up her dress in their reflection. These characters are being bombarded from all sides with messages to grow up faster than they should. One of my favorite details from the original play is that the final scene doesn't end with a school-wide carnival or a drag race. It doesn't even end with graduation. Rather, it's just another random day in these characters' lives. Sandy has rejected the media influences of Sandra Dee and decided to wear a black motorcycle jacket and be more like Rizzo. And in the end, the whole gang goes over to Roger's house to watch the Mickey Mouse Club together because, in the end, they are still just kids, and in spite of how they act, they are essentially innocent and naive. Which brings us to the movie version. 3. Grease the Blockbuster. Compared to the play, the 1978 movie version of Grease is different. So here's the deal. I didn't expect to like the movie version of Grease nearly as much as I did. In my mind, I remembered it being pretty sanitized and softened. I was sure, so very sure, that they would have removed a lot of the coarser, harsher parts of the stage play and replaced them with something that was a bit nicer, a bit more kid-friendly. Nope. The swearing, the cigarettes, the sex, they're all there. In fact, most of the changes to the musical were additive and not subtractive. It might not surprise you to learn that the Broadway musical didn't end with a car race through a ravine or a carnival or a flying car. The biggest change to the musical is one of focus. No longer is this an ensemble story of a gang of high school friends. No, this is now the Danny and Sandy show. Pretty much any song that isn't sung by Danny or Sandy is either cut or is given to them, which is why, for reasons that are completely inexplicable to me, Danny gets to sing a song about how excited he is that his friend Kaniki just got a car. But more than that, it's clear that this movie now truly believes in Danny and Sandy's love story. We begin with the two of them romping on the beach while Love Is a Many Splendored Thing plays in the background, and we conclude with them graduating from high school and flying into the sky in a car. The movie also believes in the maturity of its teenage characters. Maybe it's because the cast is made up of folks in their late 20s and early 30s, but the movie really doesn't interrogate whether or not these characters should be constantly chain-smoking or openly drinking. It's no longer kind of a sad commentary on their rush to be more mature than they are. It's just kind of a cool thing that they're all doing. From top to bottom, really, the movie strips out all irony or perspective that was present in the stage play. This is no longer a story that is being told to adult audience members who remembered the 50s. The audience for this version of Grease was the teenagers of the 70s who identified with Danny and Sandy in a straightforward, uncritical way. And so Grease was transformed into something different. It was less cynical, it was not quite as interesting, but it was more universal. 4. The Universality of Grease. In the 1990s, the musical Grease received its first revival. Incidentally, roughly the same amount of time had passed between the film's premiere in the 90s as had passed between Grease's first production and the time that it was depicting. By now, anyone who had been a teenager in the 1950s was well into middle age, and a lot of the audience members no longer remembered the time period that Grease was portraying firsthand. Rather, they remembered the movie. They knew only the 1978 version of 1959, and so something really weird started to happen. Grease, the musical, about a gritty and realistic teenage experience, well, it became kitsch. Because instead of being nostalgic for the 1950s, audiences were now nostalgic for the version of the 1950s that was filmed in the 1970s and filtered through the aesthetics of the 1990s. And it was weird. Any sense of capturing authenticity or the reality of life in the 50s was out the window. Instead, everyone was dressed in garish neon colors. The leather jackets and poodle skirts were basically Halloween costumes. Frenchie now sported a hairstyle straight out of the 80s, and her guardian angel was straight out of the Jetsons. They were also weirdly obsessed with hula hoops. I don't know why, I'm just observing that they seemed super excited about them. Look at them go. There was also an extended dance break in the middle of Greased Lightning where everyone just plays with tires. They hold them up, they drop them, they spin them, they roll them, they flip them, they swing them around their backs, they throw them in the air. It's the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen. There was also a ton of stunt casting with Rosie O'Donnell, Linda Blair, Lucy Lawless, Joe Piscopo, Brooke Shields, Sally Struthers, and at least 2 members of the Monkees being involved at various points. So, of course, the revival was enormously successful because, well, why wouldn't it be? Grease was no longer a story, it was a brand. And any sense of irony? Well, that was long gone, which leads us to 5. Grease in the 21st century. In 2016, Fox produced a live televised version of Grease. This perhaps represents Grease's final form. Nobody smoked. Nobody swore. The 50s time period was now little more than set dressing. It wasn't a historical time period, it was an aesthetic, misremembered and filtered through the decades like a generational game of telephone. Meanwhile, details from the 1978 film were recreated verbatim, from the set design to costumes to hairstyles. It wasn't an observational look back at the 50s taken from first-hand experiences, it was the recreation of a blockbuster film. Oh, and also Boys to Men were there, and Joe Jonas, and Mario Lopez, and also Eve Plum from the Brady Bunch? Its relationship with the 1950s is confused, to say the least. Gone were the omnipresent cigarettes, because of course you can't have smoking in a movie meant for teenagers. Maybe the occasional toothpick in the mouth. That's all. And in terms of alcohol consumption, well, they only lightly imply it once or twice, but most damning of all was the lack of sex, or rather, the movie's very odd relationship with sex. Let me explain. One of the funniest details about Grease is how the show's best song, Greased Lightning, is filled with absolutely filthy lyrics, because of course they're dirty. We're watching a bunch of sexed up teenage boys sing about how they're pretty sure this car is their key to attracting women. But because we can't have that on a primetime network special, we get something else. And so the lyric, "You know that ain't no shit, I'll be getting lots of tit," becomes, you know without a doubt I'll be really making out. And you are supreme, the chicks will cream for greased lightning is now you are supreme, the chicks'll scream. And in perhaps the most audacious act of censorship since the TV version of John McClane said,
"Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon,"
we get this wonderful rewriting of a lyric from, "With new pistons, plugs, and shocks, I can get off my rocks. You know that I ain't braggin'. She's a real pussy wagon," is transformed into, "With new pistons, plugs, and shocks, she can beat the super stocks. You know that I ain't braggin'. She's a real dragon wagon." Greased lightning indeed. Just absolutely seamless, am I right? But don't worry, here are some gyrating women in tight clothing dancing on the guys and whipping their hair around. We'll sanitize the lyric, but objectifying women? Yeah, why not? We can have attractive young female dancers, but we can't talk about sexual attraction or the act of sex because that's too dirty, too risque, too inappropriate. But just think about this for a moment. We've now reached the point where Grease is now the thing that it once railed against, where the teenage girls are being told that they should be attractive to boys but also not interested in sex themselves. In this version, Sandy's final form, which is supposed to be a less prudish, more liberated and free version of herself, now seems just as chaste and repressed as Sandra Dee and Doris Day. She doesn't smoke, she doesn't drink, she doesn't swear, she barely kisses Danny. She is what Rizzo railed against, and that is sad, I think. Speaking of Rizzo, in this version, she actually tells Sandy that she's jealous of her, because boys don't look at Rizzo the same way they look at Sandy, which, just, no.
See the way he looks at you, you know. Well, he never looked at me that way. No guy's ever looked at me that way. The right guy will.
No, that's not the point of Rizzo, not even a little bit. Rizzo would never view herself as a cautionary tale, and the central thesis of her character is that she doesn't view what she's doing as wrong. In fact, in the stage musical, Sandy's transformation is as much an attempt to emulate Rizzo as it is an attempt to attract Danny.
Just a minute, Miss Goody Two-Shoes. Who do you think you are, handing me all this sympathy crap? Since you have all the answers, how come I didn't see Zuko here tonight, huh?
But now, to hear Rizzo jealous of Sandy? I can't with this thing. It actually gets so bad that, okay, do you remember Eugene? The nerdy valedictorian who represents the antithesis of everything our lead characters embody? In this version, he's the reason why the T-Birds win their climactic race, because he uses his special science knowledge to improve their car. That's right, this is a production of Grease that celebrates Eugene and shames Rizzo. But on the other hand,
6.
Maybe I'm wrong. To wrap this up, I just want to point out that the irony-free version of Grease, the one that gets produced every year by high school theater programs and the one that people base Halloween costumes on, well, that's the one that people like. They want to believe in the sincerity of the story, of the lasting power of true love, of the innocence of high school, and the eternal nature of this story. I'm not gonna condemn modern versions of Grease, but it's interesting how an original, audacious musical filled with specific ideas has changed over 50 years to become a franchise. a corporate product, and something that's been made to appeal to as many audience members as possible, and has fundamentally changed its core message in the process to something that is the exact opposite of what it was originally intended to be. There is no right or wrong here. It just is what it is. But while so many people have gotten so much enjoyment out of Grease, I do think it's worth reflecting on what was lost along the way. And if you'd be so kind to do that reflecting in the comments section below, I'd be interested to know what your relationship with Grease is, and if you think my criticisms are entirely off base. I'd also love it if you'd subscribe to the channel for more overly critical pop culture analysis, and I hope to see you again next time. Until then, bye!